Something is happening in women's tennis right now that the sport simply wasn't ready for. Not the tournaments, not the rankings committee, not the biggest names in the game, and certainly not the system that's been controlling the narrative for years. A 20-year-old from the Philippines just walked into Miami Gardens, and the entire tennis world shifted on its axis. We're talking about Alex, and if you've been following her journey even casually, you already know that what's unfolding right now is something genuinely rare. Not hype. Not a feel-good underdog story packaged for social media. Something real. Something that the people in charge of this sport are starting to lose sleep over. So let's talk about it. Let's actually break down what just happened, what it means, and why the next 2 weeks in Miami could change everything we think we know about the future of women's tennis. Because this isn't just about one player having a good run. This is about a movement that's been quietly building for years suddenly becoming too loud to ignore. Alex arrived in Miami as the official 32nd seed. Let that land for a second. For the first time in history, a Filipino player has entered a WTA 1000 main draw with a seeded position. That's not a small thing. That's a landmark. That's the kind of moment that gets written about decades later when people look back and ask, when did everything change? And the answer is going to be right now, right here, in the middle of March 2026 at the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami Gardens. When she landed in Florida, the reception wasn't what you'd normally expect for a 32nd seed. There were reports coming out of the venue that the atmosphere surrounding her arrival was unlike anything they'd seen for a player outside the traditional top tier. Security details, training access on the main show courts, preparation protocols that the tournament typically reserves for the top 5 players in the world. Tournament organizers were already scrambling behind the scenes because the demand around her potential matches was breaking their usual planning models. They moved her scheduled court assignments to the stadium because the viewership projections were simply too big to ignore.
Think about that.
She hasn't even played a single point yet in Miami, and the people running the tournament already know she's the draw. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of what she did 3 weeks ago in the California desert, and it happens because of what she's been quietly becoming over the past year and a half. Indian Wells was supposed to be just another chapter. It turned into a statement. Alex fought her way through that draw with a composure and a level of play that genuinely rattled the establishment. Her run to the round of 16 wasn't lucky. It wasn't a soft draw. She beat players who had no intention of losing, including a match against the world number 4 that ended in a retirement, but not before Alex had already made it very clear which direction that match was heading. She came out of California with over $15,000 in prize money, which translates to more than 63 million Philippine pesos. And for a lot of people in the Philippines who have been watching this journey from the very beginning, that number means something beyond tennis. It means a 20-year-old from their country is competing at the highest level of a global sport and getting paid like it. Her career earnings now sit above $1.6 million before she's even turned 21. Let's just pause on that for a moment because it's easy to scroll past a number like that without really absorbing it. $1.6 million in prize money before her 21st birthday. That's not just a player on a hot streak. That's a player who has built something sustainable, something that compounds, something that the tour's power structure can no longer manage or minimize. And then there's the Nike story, because this is where things get genuinely fascinating. A few days before Miami, Alex made a stop at Nike's world headquarters in Oregon. Now, visits to the Nike campus happen all the time for sponsored athletes. It's part of the business. But what was reported about this particular visit was different. The welcome she received, the way she was treated inside those buildings, the fact that her image was already present in the hallways alongside athletes who represent the absolute pinnacle of global sport. There are photos that surface showing her portraits in the famous Nike tunnel, with imagery tied to a campaign called History in Full Bloom. And then there's the rumor that has been absolutely burning through tennis circles online. A Sampaguita-inspired signature collection. Custom kit. The national flower of the Philippines woven into a design built specifically for her. That's not something Nike does for players they see as temporary. That's something they do for players they believe are going to define an era. When you look at the athletes who have received that kind of treatment from Nike, you're looking at the short list of people who changed their sports forever. And now Alex is being mentioned in that same breath. The WTA's traditional power base has to be watching this and feeling genuinely unsettled because this isn't a story they can spin or contain. The financial independence she's building means she doesn't need favors from the tour. The corporate backing she's receiving means her platform grows with or without the establishment's blessing. And the fan base, the Filipino community globally that shows up for her in numbers that dwarf the support networks of players ranked far above her. That's the part that's truly irreplaceable. A practice video of hers hit over 94,000 views within 24 hours. Not a match highlight. Not a dramatic comeback clip. A training video. That's the level of engagement she commands, and it dwarfs the numbers that players ranked in the top 10 are pulling on the same platform. The tournament directors in Miami have clearly done the math. Now, let's talk about the draw, because this is where the tension really starts to build. As the 32nd seed, Alex receives a first-round bye. While other players are grinding through matches in the Florida Heat on Tuesday, she's resting, preparing, studying, saving her body for the rounds that actually matter. That's the privilege that comes with being elite, and she's earned it. But the part of the draw that has everyone genuinely watching is the projected path through the bracket. The math of a 32-seed draw puts her on a collision course with the top seeds as early as the third round. And the specific name that keeps coming up in those conversations is Iga Swiatek, the world number one. The player who has dominated women's tennis with such consistency that the tour has basically built its entire marketing identity around her continued excellence. Here's the thing about that potential matchup, though. It wouldn't be their first meeting on these courts. In 2025, right here in Miami, Alex beat her 6-2, 7-5. It wasn't close for most of that match. It was a performance that sent shockwaves through the tennis world and planted a seed of doubt that never quite went away. Swiatek came out of Indian Wells this year after a difficult exit against Alina Svitolina, which means she's heading into Miami without the kind of momentum and confidence she usually carries. She's vulnerable in a way that she rarely is. And Alex, by contrast, is coming in with her highest ever ranking, fresh prize money in her account, a corporate partner treating her like a future legend, and a fan base that is going to make Hard Rock Stadium feel like a home court the moment she steps on it. The psychological dimension of this potential rematch is enormous, because Swiatek doesn't just have to worry about the tennis. She has to walk onto the court knowing that this specific opponent, on this specific surface, in this specific city, has already beaten her once. And the crowd is going to be overwhelmingly for Alex. That kind of atmosphere changes matches. It changes decisions in tight moments. It changes how a player approaches a second serve when she's up 30-40 in a crucial game. You can't train that away. You just have to deal with it. And right now, dealing with Alex in Miami seems like the thing that nobody in the top 10 particularly wants to do. The broader conversation happening around her isn't just about rankings or prize money, though. It's about representation and what it means for an entire country to watch one of their own not just participate in a global sport but genuinely compete to win it. The Philippines has produced world-class athletes across different disciplines over the years, but tennis at this level, WTA 1000 events, seeded positions, Nike signature collections, potential matchups against the world number one. This is new territory. And the weight of that isn't lost on Alex or on the millions of people following her. Every point she plays carries something extra. Every win lands differently. There's a reason her fan base doesn't behave like a typical tennis following. They're not just cheering for a player. They're watching something historic happen in real time, and they understand it, and they show up for it with an intensity that changes the energy in every building she walks into. The tournament organizers in Miami understand this. The television networks covering the event understand this. Even the players around her understand this, even if some of them would prefer not to say it out loud. The question that's hanging over everything as the draw gets set and the matches begin to take shape is a simple one. How far can she go? Can she back up Indian Wells with another deep run? Can she get through the third round and find herself face-to-face with Swiatek again on a court where she's already proven she can beat her? Can she make a run deep enough into this tournament to crack the top 20 in the live rankings? And if she does, what does that do to the conversation around her? What does that do to the endorsement conversations, the sponsorship structures, the way the tour schedules and promotes its biggest events? Because the math here is real. A strong Miami result, depending on how deep she goes, could push her into territory that forces the entire tour infrastructure to acknowledge that a new face at the top is not just possible but imminent. The structure of women's tennis has been incredibly stable at the top for several years now. The same names, the same storylines, the same faces on the promotional materials. And that stability has served the tour well in some ways, but it's also made the whole thing feel a little predictable. Alex disrupts that predictability in a way that's genuinely exciting for the sport. She's young. She's playing some of the most watchable tennis on tour. She has a story that resonates across cultural lines, and she's backed by resources and partners that signal long-term institutional belief in what she's building. The WTA can either lean into that and let the narrative unfold naturally, or they can keep trying to manage it, and every week that passes makes the managing option look less and less viable. There's one more thing worth saying before we get into what this week actually looks like on the court. Alex's journey to this point has not been handed to her. There was no wild card gifting her easy draws into big tournaments. There was no protected ranking keeping her in main draws when her results dipped. She scratched and clawed and qualified and ground out wins against players who were higher ranked and more experienced, in conditions that weren't always fair and on courts that weren't always center stage. That history matters now because it means when she steps onto the stadium court in Miami with thousands of people rooting for her, she knows she belongs there. Not because someone decided to give her a platform, because she built one. And that kind of confidence, the kind that comes from actually earning every single step of the climb, is different from the confidence that comes with a high seed and a big contract. It's quieter and it runs deeper, and it doesn't panic when the pressure gets real. So as Miami gets underway and the bracket begins to fill in, and the stories start to emerge from the courts and the press rooms and the training facilities, the one story that is already writing itself is Alex's. The seeded Filipina who showed up to Florida not as a surprise guest, but as a legitimate contender. The player who has already beaten the world number one on these courts and is coming back to do it again. The 20-year-old who walked into Nike headquarters and left with her portrait on the wall. The woman who has turned a following into a force and a moment into a movement. Miami is about to find out who she really is at this level, and everything we've seen so far suggests the answer is going to be extraordinary.